Today we're going to be talking about intentional communities, cooperatives, shared living, something that's near and dear to my heart. For many, many years I was very interested in this topic, and that's really been a big part of my life, the advocacy of that. I haven't always lived in small groups or been involved in board meetings or service clubs and so forth. I find that what makes communities and cooperatives outstanding is excellent leadership and trying to keep people on track. It's really not for everybody to live this way, but cooperation will really save a lot of resources and be very, very good for a person's self-identity. And frankly, I had some pretty good privacy when I was involved in cooperative living and had my own room. There were norms and guidelines about privacy that made it a lot easier for that particular issue. Now, the types of things that are useful are affordability. When I was a member of Twin Oaks in Virginia, I didn't hardly see my wallet for a year and a half. No bills are paid, no money was made. I was a free soul, and it gave me a sense of freedom once I got used to it, and I was kind of ready for it. And the question is, how in the world did I get interested in this in the first place? As a young child, we had a beautiful creek and a beautiful woods behind the house. And I used to go down there and go fishing and walking and looking at some crayfish and scaring a few bluegill and looking for a bass that probably wouldn't take my lure. And I would really feel like the creek was mine for the day or ours for the day or a public type of thing. And it could be shared. And if there were other people that came and would fly fish or raft, or it would just spread the enjoyment. That was Murat Park was what it was called. Also in our neighborhood, we had the sense that the young people could go anywhere, and I'm sure that there are some adults that didn't quite agree with this, but they had fences that were jumped, little passages between fences. We'd take our bicycles. We'd go from street to street, cul-de-sac to cul-de-sac, and as if there were no fences, that everybody was like one happy family. And I'm sure that discouraged a few people, but at least their basketball court got used. The whole venture toward community living came really through university as well. My sociology background was really from a minor in my doctorate studies at Indiana University in geography, the sociology of communities. That was my doctorate minor. And so I took it on an academic level, which is typical Bill. He loves to study everything and analyze and detail this and detail that. And, but it made me a happy camper to major, or actually minor in that subject. Now, the idea that we would be living in community didn't quite dawn to me until Needmore, which was in Brown County, northwest Brown County, was being established, and Kathy Canada was involved, and she was writing articles for the Brown County paper on organic living. You are what you eat. And we kept going over there and watching the sheep being sheared and the goats being milked, bees being kept for honey, small gardens everywhere, and horses galore for recreation and even to ride to the store. Occasionally, the horseback rider would even ride all the way into Nashville, which is about 7 miles or so. And that would kind of scare all of the Nashville people. There wasn't a good place to hook up your stallion in front of the saloon. It was just Needmore, and it was sign of the times. It was really communal living, and at its heyday, the sort of the hippie movement of the 60s, and we became endeared with that whole concept, and especially homesteading and raising our own food. That sounded like a good idea. We bought 15 acres north of Helmsburg, Indiana, and it had a lake on it. It was a beautiful piece of property. We installed its first bathroom, and we installed power and water out to some small sheds that we had bought for our animals. And Lordy day, we ended up with about a dozen dairy goats to milk and to enjoy. We had chickens, about 200 chickens, and sold eggs to Blooming Foods. We had tapped our maple trees in the front yard and sold and gave away some maple syrup that we had made. We just had a great time kind of living off the land, and this was called Ladybug Farm. We got in a big box of ladybugs. They'd come into Helmsburg post office, and it was like, what is this? So they called us right away, and I told them, I said, in a couple of weeks we're going to get some more boxes of bees, and now you really got to call me quickly. And so that was our farm, Ladybug Farm, and we got interested in dairy goats because we made the mistake of going to the state fair and seeing better ones. And then we went to the national show in Ohio State Fair, and the goats were about 10 times better looking and bigger, and looked like something out of a high-end enterprise. And we fell in love with that concept of breeding dairy goats. Now, some of our friends are breeding dogs and cats, particularly dogs, for a little extra income, and said, "Well, breed dairy goats if you get a bunch." So we did, and we went up to a famous breeder and got our does that we bought at the national show. We got them bred, and suddenly we got hooked on dairy goats. Eventually we left our little homestead, which was a big mistake in some ways, and decided to do a commercial dairy in Wisconsin. Commercial dairies is like going off the cliff, with boxes of hamsters, or rabbits, or pigeons, or whatever you're trying to sell that's unique. Because dairy goat milk, you sell about 1 quart per 1,000 people per day. And it's got to be grade A, so you have to have a cleanable parlor. And it's the greatest money thief that anybody could ever dream up. But we were into it because goats are really attentive and wonderful companions, and we enjoyed the chores. It's kind of like a meditation. But the shows that we started going to, we started winning. And I said, what? And it came from breeding the stock to good males that were highly pedigreed. And over the years, we won a lot of championships at the state fair, and even some at the national show. One of the proudest things about the dairy goats over time, this all came from the Ladybug Farm, the homesteading and Needmore and everything like that, and cooperation. But one of the things I really liked is we had a 2-year-old Toggenburg, a 2-year-old La Mancha, and a 2-year-old Alpine, 3 different distinctive breeds that won at the national show their class. Usually be classes of about 25 or 30 animals. They won their class as 2-year-olds already in milk, and they came back, all 3 of them came back and won as 4-year-olds. So not only was the breeding sound, but the management of getting animals to peak and to be the best in the country gave us, I think, a lot of credit. And I actually addressed the national convention with a fairly long talk. And I always like to do things like that. I just jump to the front of the stage every time I get a chance for somebody to listen to me. Now the communities. Yeah, let's get back to the communities. The first time we really experienced community is we decided to come back and move back to Needmore. They were going to charge us a huge amount of money. That is, if your pockets were empty. Our rent was $5 a month per adult, and we thought we could actually we could get that somewhere. And then we were homesteading in what was called the Valley House, and it was near Plum Creek, kind of up on a hill. And the house is built in the wrong place, so it took some drainage through the back door, probably more than once. So it wasn't the prime real estate of the world. However, it kind of matched pretty well the costs per month. Over time, we stayed in Needmore and moved up to a higher class neighborhood on Dovebill Lane, which was we used to call the Lake Road. It's up near the Needmore Lake, the famous should say skinny dipping lake, but maybe I shouldn't say that. But at least you saved on your bathing suit costs. We would love that lake. I tell you, float around in an inner tube for almost every day. And the fact, when we finally moved, we were off the grid. We didn't have running water. So going swimming every day, you didn't take a bar of soap, but you were a lot cleaner anyway when you came out of that lake. So this was cooperative living in that we had the property, and there was a great deal of cooperation of sharing things. And living off the grid was interesting. In fact, we shared power. We tried to anyway. Orange cord about 800 feet long from the neighbor. That cord was smoking through the woods. It was off. It was being pulled too hard. But it did power eventually a 15 light bulb in our barn. But we used Aladdin lamps at night, and mineral spirits is the kind of fuel we used. It's kind of hard grading papers because I was still teaching university at Butler. So I had something legitimate to do, so I didn't feel like I was totally on the street or something, or in the lost in the forest. So I would teach during the day, but then I had to grade papers by lantern light. That was pretty interesting. We had a Yodel stove, which is the top of the line, and the Yodel stove had a baffle on the inside, steel plate, and we could put our meat from the harvest of our own animals, which of course I didn't really like the processing of that, and guess who had to do most of that. But when we had the meat, it was smoked within the wood stove, and put the meat right on the baffle and close the lid. And 15 minutes later, bronze meat would come out, whether it would be duck, rabbit, goat, or whatever. Might be a chicken. I kind of remember one time the dog got into the neighbor's chicken, so I immediately went down and came back with about 20 thighs that I could process pretty quickly, and we could have some food, thanks to the dog that got into them. Needmore was a happy place, and there's a lot of people came out from town, and they just partied like crazy. And the music, though, was outstanding up on Indian Hill Road. And this was shared. Everything was shared. I mean, the people came, and 20, 30 people would be there listening to wonderful music. The String Band did a lot of its rehearsing there. Bob Lucas, Bill Schwartz, a lot of individuals would play their music there on what we call the Indian Mound, which is really just a terrace above Plum Creek. Probably no Indians ever saw it, but we made that a wonderful place for campfires and really outstanding music before people would go on tour. So that was cooperation. And we built a community building, some hexagon pods, and we shared that. Some people actually lived in the community building at one time. We had our fields, and we shared that. We got hay off of fields, and we got soybeans that we grew cooperatively. And we didn't feel like we owned anything that was within the community rights. And it meant that all the big trees would stay, and the landscape wouldn't change that much. And people were just having a good time. There was a big difference between families and homesteading groups and party people. But we'll leave that for another day when we talk about the hilarious part of living in a commune. It was called a commune, but it was more like a community. Each family, and there were a lot of families, had individual houses. Needmore was a great place for a start, but Joan and I did a very interesting thing. Joan, the mother of my kids, my ex-wife, we went to a communal living week at Twin Oaks in Virginia. Well, we didn't realize, we maybe thought this could happen, that this would be a turning point in our life. So we got there, and a whole week long, there was about 20 people from all over the country, and maybe some foreign countries as well, that talked a lot about community like nonstop, and kind of created the aspects of community and what would be the right norms and the right authority and the right resources and the right industries, and how can you actually make one of these work and not have any hard feelings at all. What kind of personalities do you need to draw to the community? And we do know that communities do need leadership, and there are good ways to do that. Now, the Communal Living Week, Joan and I came back and I said, let's do this. Let's go to one of the Federation for Egalitarian Communities, and let's live there. But then we started realizing that we had 3 children, a passel of goats, probably 75 goats, and dogs and cats and probably toads and ducks and you name it, almost anything you can think of we had. We probably had some pet black snakes that we would let loose underneath the house. And of course, we weren't good candidates, for a group living situation with all this menagerie of stuff that it's like Noah coming in and resting his ark, in your neighborhood. It probably wouldn't go over real well with everybody. So we started our own community. Well, that's like walking the gangplank. But it was called Chrysalis, and it became a member of the Federation for Egalitarian Communities, which was pretty awesome. And it was probably the best group of communities in the country, and the best advertised. And they had a magazine called Communities Magazine. They had an annual book of index of existing communities. So they were pretty far ahead in terms of this as a movement, cooperative movement, one that obviously quashed isolation totally. And did value privacy, so they tried to make arrangements for that. But the Chrysalis that we did create, it was not a disaster, and it was not a success. So I'll leave it with your analysis to your imagination. We lacked money. I mean, what group doesn't sometimes? We didn't have quite enough housing, and then we lived off the grid, which isn't really for everybody. And we had so many guests that didn't really like that whole concept, but we loved it for some reason. And as an egalitarian community, we had about 35, 40 people from other communities all over the country and in Europe visit us. that was what was made it worthwhile. And Joan and I were both working. Joan was a manager of Blooming Foods or the manager of Blooming Foods for quite a while in Bloomington, a co-op food store, big store. And she was a person in charge. And I was still teaching university. I was teaching usually night classes. And so we were gone working and supplied some of the cash. And I think another problem with Chrysalis is the land name was all over everything. We had 4 of our kids there for most of the time, and my oldest daughter, Pat, was gone, lived somewhere else. But we had a little bit of extra authority, and that's a no-no when you're trying to create a good group situation. And often you want to take a year or so without even buying the land until you get that worked out. So there's more of a shared resource base, and there's somebody's not making money off of it. We weren't making money off of it, but what you say and what's believed sometimes are two different things.